Some warriors possess a discipline that cannot shatter, not when exhaustion consumes them, not when chaos surrounds them, not when surrender seems like the only path forward. What you're about to learn is the forgotten system that forged unshakable fighters across centuries. Have you ever considered how shadow warriors survived complete isolation for entire seasons in remote wilderness? How they practiced their deadly arts in absolute secrecy for decades without detection? How they maintained perfect consistency without smartphones, calendars, or external accountability? The secret has nothing to do with raw willpower. It connects to something called the shadow path, the way of the unseen warrior. And once you grasp the 5 foundations of this ancient methodology, you'll recognize that every discipline habit you've attempted to construct was actually built upon quicksand. These shadow warriors understood a fundamental truth about human nature that behavioral scientists only confirmed centuries afterward. Our minds weren't engineered for self-control. They were wired for survival above all else. That's precisely why their methods succeed when modern approaches collapse entirely. But this knowledge carries a heavy cost. This journey refuses those seeking casual improvement. It requires absolute surrender. Surrender of the fragile version of yourself that repeatedly betrays your own commitments. Before revealing how this methodology operates in practice, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, press the like button, and enable notifications so upcoming content reaches you directly. Your support means everything. Now, let's continue. Chapter 1. The Boy Everyone Dismissed. Key Peninsula, 1552. There lived a 14-year-old named Koji, known throughout his village by an unfortunate title, Koji the Hopeless. This young man had dreamed of becoming a shadow warrior since witnessing dark figures gliding across moonlit rooftops. But he carried one devastating flaw. He was absolutely worthless at commitment. Each morning arrived with identical promises. Today marks my transformation. He would complete 5 push-ups, feel drained, then wander toward food. He would pledge to practice stillness. 2 minutes later, his thoughts scattered everywhere. He would swear to drill with his training staff. After 6 strikes, his shoulders burned and he surrendered. The cycle repeated endlessly. First light brought determination. Afternoon brought excuses. The following dawn erased any memory of previous vows. His father hammered iron for neighboring farmers, a practical craftsman with weathered hands and zero tolerance for fantasy. Koji, shadow warriors belong in children's stories. The tales mothers whisper to frightened sons, "You will master metalwork and abandon this foolishness forever." His father actually knew the truth. He knew shadow warriors existed. He knew their hidden academy waited in distant mountains. He possessed knowledge of its exact location, but he concealed this information completely, always feigning disbelief because he lacked confidence in his son's character and desperately wanted this obsession to die. Yet, Koji couldn't release the dream. In every evening, his gaze drifted toward distant peaks where the secret academy supposedly existed. Every sunrise brought renewed thoughts, perhaps genuine effort this time, and every sunset brought another surrender, until everything shifted entirely, though not how he anticipated. Koji was walking home following another wasted afternoon, 30 minutes pretending sticks were swords, when he noticed a figure blocking the trail ahead. An unremarkable man, common garments, nothing distinctive whatsoever, except his eyes. Those eyes appeared to penetrate his very soul. "You desire the shadow path?" This wasn't inquiry. This was declaration. Koji felt ice flood his veins. You were wasting daylight once more." The stranger advanced 2 measured paces. "How many occasions have you promised yourself transformation?" Silence fell between them, because Koji already knew. Hundreds of broken promises, perhaps thousands. "Follow my footsteps." The stranger pivoted toward the mountains. "If you can maintain my pace until the summit, I'll reveal the academy's location. Failure means accepting your father's forge as your eternal destiny." Koji studied the towering peaks. 3 hours of brutal ascending terrain. He had never sustained any activity for 3 consecutive hours throughout his existence. But something felt fundamentally altered within this moment. Maybe it was the devastating honesty within the stranger's voice. Maybe it was understanding this represented his singular opportunity. Or perhaps he had simply grown exhausted from perpetual weakness. "I'll come." The opening 20 minutes proved manageable. At 40 minutes, his legs began screaming. 1 hour into the ascent, his consciousness unleashed familiar sabotage. "This defies logic. You're not constructed for such demands. Return at dawn." But the stranger continued climbing without backward glances, without deceleration, meaning without single words of encouragement. 2 hours passed. Koji was crawling, palms and knees grinding against stone, tears streaming, every fiber of his being demanding cessation, and precisely then, understanding crystallized in ways that would reshape everything. Physical suffering held no significance, exhaustion carried no weight. What truly mattered was the commitment made at that trail's beginning. He had declared his intention. Warriors honor their declarations. Koji somehow forced himself upright. He continued forward. 3 hours and 20 minutes afterward, Koji collapsed at the peak. He dropped to his knees, emptied his stomach, and lost consciousness entirely. Awakening came inside temple walls. Dark wooden beams surrounded him. Incense perfumed the air. Perfect stillness enveloped everything. The stranger sat facing him directly. "You completed the initial teaching of the shadow path without recognizing it. Welcome to the Iga Academy." Chapter 2, Destroying the Fragile Self. Koji awakened before first light to a bell's vibration. Not a gentle chime, a bronze instrument whose resonance seemed to penetrate his skull directly. Surveying his surroundings, he discovered 15 other young men already standing, wearing identical dark garments, eyes fixed forward. The master, that same mountain stranger, stood centrally positioned. Within the shadow path, attempts do not exist. Only 2 states exist. You are or you are not. Right from this instant forward, you exist as students. Students rise when the bell speaks. No discussion. Koji peered through the window. Darkness remained absolute. But master, what hour? The master silenced him with a gaze capable of liquefying stone. Questions represent thoughts. Thoughts birth hesitation. Hesitation births death. The bell resonates. You rise, nothing further. The opening week delivered pure agony. The bell spoke at impossible hours. Silent stillness practice consumed 1 hour. Brutal physical conditioning consumed 2 more. Strategic study filled another 2. Stealth technique drilling continued until twilight. Sleep, repeat, forever. Koji craved surrender every single sunrise. But here existed the crucial distinction. Surrender was impossible. Because within the shadow path, crossing that threshold meant something far beyond personal commitment. It meant pronouncing a sacred vow before everyone present. On arrival's first morning, each student stood before the assembled community and declared, "I exist as a student of the shadow path. My spoken word equals my life force. Breaking my word renders me worthless." The entire academy witnessed this declaration. 15 fellow students absorbed every syllable. The master inscribed it within permanent records. Identity fundamentally transformed within that instant. Do you comprehend what transpired? Koji didn't pledge to make an effort. He announced his new identity. And when identity shifts publicly, your primitive brain interprets failure as social annihilation. Our ancestors who forfeited their tribe's confidence perished. They faced exile. Survival alone proved impossible. Your brain continues operating identically today. When you announce something publicly or privately and subsequently fail, ancient neural circuitry interprets this as existential threat. Our shadow warriors grasped this principle centuries before neuroscience emerged. I'm not suggesting they possessed scientific vocabulary. I'm saying they possessed philosophical wisdom. Their philosophy demanded, never violate your sacred vow. Third morning arrived. Koji awakened with his body demolished. Every muscle howled. His consciousness immediately launched familiar arguments. You've sustained injury. Recovery requires rest. Single days change nothing. He surveyed his surroundings. Every other student stood ready. Nobody voiced complaints. Nobody sought negotiation. And critically, remaining prone meant everyone witnessing his failure. The disgrace of breaking his vow before witnesses proved infinitely more powerful than physical suffering. He rose. Fifth evening during the meal, one student murmured quietly, "Brother, this pace will destroy us. Survival seems impossible." The master heard everything. He stood immediately. "Gather your belongings. You're expelled." The boy turned, ghostly pale. "But I did nothing wrong. I merely expressed, you planted doubt among us. Doubt functions as poison. Within the shadow path, voiced thoughts become actions. You have acted against your sacred vow. Depart." The student departed. His return never occurred, and complaint never echoed within those walls again. Because everyone internalized this truth, the sacred vow wasn't ceremonial decoration. It formed the foundation supporting everything. But Koji rapidly discovered that sacred vows only resolved half his internal struggle. Because even with collective pressure, even with expulsion's terror hovering above, he continued fighting an internal war every single dawn. That's when the master revealed the second foundation of the shadow path, Jikan, the principle of eternal rhythm. Chapter 3. The rhythm that cannot break. You recognize that silent torture unfolding inside your skull every morning. Should exercise happen now or following breakfast? Should rising occur at 5 or 6? Should action happen today or tomorrow when energy improves? You believe you're demonstrating flexibility. In reality, you're hemorrhaging mental energy on microscopic decisions that weaken you before anything begins. The master summoned Koji following 2 weeks. You continue hesitating. I observe it within your eyes each morning. Koji felt surprise wash over him. But master, I rise daily. I've never failed once. Rising represents insufficient achievement. You continue deciding whether rising should occur. Wherever decision persists, weakness persists. We must eliminate decision itself. The master continued explaining. Within authentic shadow path practice, time never varies. Time remains absolute constant. The bell speaks at dawn because existence requires constance. When time becomes non-negotiable, negotiation becomes impossible. Your physical form lacks intelligence, the master stated. But your unintelligent form absorbs patterns. Rising at different hours daily means your body anticipates nothing. It resists you continuously. But when timing remains identical daily, your body begins preparing automatically before sound reaches your ears. Koji remained skeptical until week 3. On day 19, he awakened moments before the bell sounded. His body had learned unconsciously. On day 25, his eyes opened naturally 2 minutes early. By day 30, he achieved complete alertness, feet touching ground, consciousness crystal clear before any external stimulus. His body had constructed an internal timepiece, not because he possessed special gifts, because the pattern permitted 0 exceptions. But fixed scheduling only resolved timing questions. Koji discovered a fresh battlefield awaiting him. What activities should fill training hours? Some days his preference leaned toward strength development, others favored velocity work. When occasionally, inspiration struck for climbing practice. Other moments called for blade technique refinement. His consciousness had identified a fresh negotiation opportunity. Since arguing about timing became impossible, he began arguing about methodology. The master observed this pattern too. You're manufacturing chaos where structure should exist. Within the shadow path, we practice katachi, perfect pattern, repeated without end. And then came explanation that initially sounded like madness. For 100 consecutive days, you will execute precisely identical training sequences. Same movements, same sequence, same repetition counts. 0 variation whatsoever. Koji felt confusion overwhelm him. But master, won't monotony consume me? Won't progress cease? Monotony represents ego-resisting metamorphosis, and progress only occurs when practice becomes so automated that awareness can finally perceive invisible details. Chapter 4. The pattern that liberates. Here's what nobody ever explains about variety. You assume variety maintains engagement, but variety actually represents where discipline dies. Every day you modify your routine, your brain must execute micro-decisions. Should squats or running happen today? How much time belongs to each exercise? Which technique deserves priority? Every decision creates a crack through which old patterns seep back. Koji commenced his personal transformation period. 100 days following identical structure, the sequence proved brutal. 50 push-ups, 100 squats, 30 minutes of blade practice following specific patterns, 20 minutes of breathing techniques, same sequence, same location, same hour, every single day. Opening week, his consciousness screamed for novelty. This defies reason. You're human, not machinery. Introduce variation or madness follows. And second week brought commentary from fellow students. Brother, you're becoming mechanical. Where's spontaneity? Where's personal expression? The master heard and laughed. Creativity lacking foundation represents organized chaos. You desire self-expression. First, master the structure. Only then will something worth expressing exist. Third week delivered pure psychological warfare. Daily, Koji battled the voice demanding, try something different today. Just once, just to prevent boredom. But he recalled the expelled student. He recalled his sacred vow. He continued the pattern. Fourth week brought something unexpected. Mental resistance began weakening, not because Koji grew stronger, because resistance exhausts faster than discipline endures. His brain recognized no available escape. Regardless of how loudly it demanded variation, the response remained constant. No. Eventually, the brain ceased demanding. Week 6 witnessed magic manifesting. Koji was mid-push-up when realization struck. He wasn't thinking at all. His body was flowing through the sequence independently, like water following its eternal channel. This wasn't boredom. This was freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of perpetual decision-making. 8th week during blade practice, he perceived for the first time a microscopic flaw in his wrist rotation. Something impossible to notice if his consciousness had been occupied, choosing which technique deserves attention. The master observed silently. Now you perceive. When pattern becomes automatic, consciousness can finally attend. Behavioral researchers studying habit automation for nearly 2 decades have uncovered something remarkable. When you repeat an exact action sequence for approximately 66 days within identical context, the basal ganglia assume movement control. The prefrontal cortex becomes available for elevated functions. Behavior becomes as automatic as respiration. Day 45 arrived. Koji developed high fever. His body felt fragile. His skull felt heavy. Everything ached. The temptation was obvious. I'll skip today. Nobody trains while sick. Tomorrow brings recovery. This represents where everyone surrenders, where you've surrendered previously. Because you accept the all-or-nothing deception. If perfection proves impossible, inaction seems logical. If completeness proves impossible, waiting seems reasonable. This logic appears sensible, but it actually represents the silent assassin of every consistency attempt you've ever undertaken. Koji approached his master. Master, illness weakens me. Should rest happen today? The master regarded him as though he'd uttered the most foolish words imaginable. Rest differs from abandonment. If genuine rest becomes necessary, rest. But you're not requesting rest. You're requesting permission to create a gap. What distinguishes them? Rivers never cease flowing. During drought, they become trickles. During storms, they become torrents. But cessation never occurs. The moment cessation occurs, the river no longer exists. Only a hole where water once flowed remains. Your practice operates identically. And then the master revealed the third foundation of the shadow path, Renzoku, practice without interruption. Feeling weakness today? Execute 10 push-ups rather than 50. Meditate 5 minutes rather than 20. But execute something. Because momentum holds more value than perfection. Koji completed half the normal training. It was terrible. It was imperfect. It was completely sufficient. Because he maintained momentum, he didn't create a gap. The following morning, when fever subsided, his body resumed full training as though nothing had interrupted. Had he abandoned completely, his body would have interpreted this as pattern alteration. It would have resisted the next day. Well, abandonment happened yesterday. Why not day 2? But because no gap ever formed, the pattern remained inviolate. Day 70 arrived. Massive storm descended. The training hall flooded completely. Koji believed he finally possessed legitimate excuse. He sought his master. "Master, where does training occur today?" The master pointed toward the covered terrace. "There. But rain is falling," the master replied. "And? Do you imagine enemies only attack during pleasant weather? Do you imagine missions only occur during comfortable conditions?" Koji trained in the rain, soaked garments, slippery footing, bone-penetrating cold, but he trained without interruption. Chapter 5. The Invisible Readiness. But Koji was approaching discovery of something that nearly destroyed him entirely, because regardless of how powerful your sacred vow, how fixed your schedule, how perfect your pattern, one obstacle category defeats everyone. The obstacle you never anticipated. On day 80 arrived. Koji's father appeared at the academy entrance. Family emergency. Immediate return to the village was required. Koji felt panic rise, not concerning the emergency, concerning his training. 20 days remained until 100. If interruption happened now, the master stopped him before words could form. "Do you believe obstacles request permission? Do you believe life respects your 100-day commitment?" "But master, I vowed to complete. You vowed to practice without interruption. You didn't vow it would be convenient. This represents your authentic test, not when perfection surrounds you, but when chaos surrounds you." And then the master revealed the fourth foundation, Junbi, prior readiness. Shadow warriors are never caught unprepared because they have already determined their responses before questions arise. When situation X manifests, action Y follows, without thinking, without hesitation, just execution. The master had Koji sit and catalog every conceivable obstacle: travel, illness, visitors, emergencies, extreme weather, physical injury. For each scenario, they documented the precise response. Traveling, pre-dawn roadside training; illness, half the repetitions; arm injury, leg-focused training; rain, covered terrace; family emergency; essential 15-minute condensed practice. Koji returned to his village. He spent 3 days assisting his family. But every morning at 4, he awakened. He executed a condensed version, 20 push-ups, 10 minutes of stillness practice, basic blade patterns. Neighbors believed he'd lost his sanity. Your father requires help, and you're playing with weapons at 4 in the morning? But Koji grasped something they never would. He was helping his father throughout every daylight hour. Morning training subtracted nothing from that assistance. It maintained his identity intact so he could remain strong for his family. He returned to the academy on day 83. The master asked, "How many days were missed?" "0, master." The master smiled for the first occasion. Now, understanding begins. Behavioral psychologists studying decision-making for over 2 decades have discovered something critical. When you predetermine your actions, you eliminate decision fatigue from critical moments. Your prefrontal cortex, like responsible for willpower, remains intact to execute rather than deliberate. This can increase success rates by up to 300%. Day 95 arrived, 5 days remaining until 100. Koji had transformed. Everyone at the academy noticed. He didn't discuss training. He simply trained. He didn't promise early rising. He simply rose. He didn't require motivation. Practice happened independently. Other students began whispering, "How does he accomplish this? How does he never fail?" One senior student responded, "He doesn't try. He simply is." Day 100 arrived. Koji completed the sequence for the 100th consecutive occasion. No failures, no gaps, no exceptions. The bell sounded, marking the transformation period's conclusion. He anticipated feeling relief. He anticipated wanting celebration, but he felt only stillness, a profound, strange stillness. The master summoned him. "How do you feel?" "Empty, master." But not negatively, as though something heavy has been removed. What departed was the version of you that required decisions. Now you've reached the fifth foundation of the shadow path, Kukan, the empty mind. Chapter 6. The mind without hesitation. Kukan means empty mind, the master explained. But this doesn't mean stupidity. It means no ego, no hesitation, no internal conflict between what you should do and what you want to do. When an enemy attacks with a blade, time for thinking doesn't exist. Should I dodge or block? If thinking occurs, death follows. The response must be automatic, instantaneous, without the interfering hesitation of ego. This is what you've constructed across those 100 days. Not merely an exercise habit, you've eliminated the part of you that negotiates with yourself. Koji understood completely. Across the final 30 days, not one thought about bargaining had arisen. No, what if I skip today? No, perhaps tomorrow suits better. Our practice simply occurred, like heartbeat pulsing, like lungs breathing. The master continued, now comes the authentic test. Your 100 days concluded. The fixed pattern concluded. The question becomes, will you return to your former self? Or have you become something fundamentally different? Koji required no deliberation. I will continue. Why? Because I'm no longer someone who practices. I'm someone who exists as this. The master nodded slowly. A welcome to authentic shadow path mastery. 3 months passed. Koji was no longer a student. He was a shadow warrior. Not because he received formal certification, because something fundamental within his structure had transformed. His discipline unsettled other students. He never discussed training, never complained, never negotiated. He simply existed as someone who executed necessary actions. One day, a fresh student asked, "How do you manage to never fail?" While Koji offered identical words his master once gave. Failure no longer exists as an option within my consciousness, not because I possess strength, because I've eliminated the option entirely. The student appeared confused. How does one eliminate an option? You sacrifice the person you were, the person who negotiated, the person who hesitated. And when that person dies, only the warrior who honors his word remains. But Koji's transformation extended beyond training, and something far deeper had occurred. And when people started noticing, they didn't say how impressive. They said, this isn't normal, and that's precisely what you need to hear. Chapter 7. The Warrior Who Unsettles. 6 months following transformation period completion, Koji received his first authentic mission, infiltrating an enemy fortress to recover critical documents. The mission spanned 7 days. 7 days without proper sleep, without sufficient nutrition, without comfort. Everything that could collapse did collapse. But Koji completed the mission. He returned with the documents. When fellow shadow warriors asked how he endured, he simply stated, I executed what required execution. But the truth went deeper. During those 7 days, not once did Koji think, I cannot continue, because that voice had perished long ago. In its place existed only clarity, only action. The master called him later. People will begin perceiving you differently. They'll label you obsessive. They'll say you're extreme, that you require balance. Do you know why? No, master. Because your discipline exposes their weakness. You are living evidence that every excuse they make is merely a choice, and that makes them profoundly uncomfortable. And the master spoke truth. As Koji's reputation grew, people's responses transformed. Some admired him, others feared him, but most reacted with something between discomfort and resentment. He's not normal. Nobody requires such discipline. That can't be healthy. But Koji had absorbed something crucial. When your discipline unsettles others, you finally reach the correct level. Ordinary people achieve ordinary results, but warriors, authentic warriors, operate on a different plane. A plane where I can't doesn't exist in the vocabulary. One morning, Koji was training in the courtyard at 4 when a group of new students passed by. One of them muttered, "Brother, that's disturbing." He never stops. Koji heard and smiled, because he remembered the boy he was 5 years prior, the boy who couldn't complete 5 push-ups, the boy everyone called hopeless. That boy was no more, and in his place stood a warrior. The shadow path doesn't make you a better person. It makes you a different person entirely. A person others will observe and think, "That's not human." And when you hear those words, you know you've finally eliminated the weak version of yourself. Because here's the truth, the system isn't complicated. It contains 5 foundations. First, Seiyaku, the sacred vow. You stop making private promises nobody knows about. You start making public declarations that transform your identity. Not, "I will try," but "I am." Second, Jikan, the eternal rhythm. You select fixed timing and remove time as a variable. Your body absorbs the pattern. Negotiation about when simply disappears. Third, Katachi, the perfect pattern. You execute precisely identical actions every day for at least 100 days. No variation, no creativity, just repetition until practice becomes automatic. 4. Renzoku, practice without interruption. You never create complete gaps regardless of circumstances. Emergency brings reduced version. Illness brings half practice, but never zero. Because zero breaks momentum. 5th, Junbi, prior readiness. You catalog every possible obstacle and predetermine your response. When situation X arises, action Y follows. No thinking, no negotiating, just execution. These 5 foundations transformed Koji from a boy who couldn't complete 5 push-ups into a shadow warrior who accomplished impossible missions, not because he became stronger, because he eliminated the part of him that hesitated. And now I ask you directly, are you prepared for this kind of transformation? Because I won't deceive you. This path isn't comfortable. It's not easy. It's not for those seeking minor improvements. The shadow path system will require sacrificing a version of yourself, the version that negotiates, the version that hesitates, the version possessing 1,000 excuses about why today isn't the right day. And in that person's place, a warrior will emerge, someone who doesn't require cheap motivation, because cheap motivation is for those still deciding. A warrior is someone who doesn't break commitments, because commitments are identity, not items on a checklist. People will perceive you differently. They'll call you obsessive. They'll say you need to relax, that you're overreacting, that this isn't healthy. Excellent. That means you're on the correct path. Because the discipline that unsettles others is the only discipline worth possessing. The discipline that makes people uncomfortable is the only discipline that produces extraordinary results. The question isn't whether the system works. The question is, do you possess courage for complete commitment? Don't try, don't experiment. Commit. Choose one habit, just one. Make your sacred vow. Select your fixed timing. Define your perfect pattern. Commit to 100 days without interruption. Predetermine every obstacle's response, and then observe what happens when you stop negotiating with yourself. Koji wasn't special. He was merely a weak boy who decided to sacrifice himself so a warrior could emerge. You can do the same. If you found value in this video, I invite you to like it and subscribe to The Unbroken Way and enable the bell for future content. Remember, discipline is only harmful when there's too little of it. If you've reached this point, thank you deeply for your attention. Until the next video.